I'm Rob Thomas. I'm the Racial Justice Coalition Community Liaison. I'm also a native of Asheville. I also was incarcerated myself for over 10 years. And, now I'm able to narrow my focus to racial justice, decarceration, and activism around police accountability. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and get into the introduction of our panelists. Uh, First up on my list is Mr. Phillip Cooper, my brother. Phillip Cooper is a Western North Carolina native that fell in love with the streets at a young age. While growing up in poverty, he identified the drug dealers as they were the ones that appeared to run a more lucrative business. While in the streets, he started using hard drugs, which contradicted his career as a drug dealer and landed him years in prison for high level offenses. He is known for his statement, "Prison saved my life." While in prison, he completed self-help courses, rededicated his life to Christ, and was mentored by a man who had been in prison for over 10 years. Upon release from prison, Phillip immediately connected with the recovery community, which is where he found his love for counseling and peer mentoring. He became a peer mentor and worked as a case manager for 3 years before he transitioned into reentry services for returning citizens. Since then, he's become a regional organizer and advocate for policy change and now manages an award-winning reentry program called Upskill WNC. Phillip says that he continues to reach back and help others because the only way to keep what he has is by giving it away. And that's only a small portion of his accomplishments. Next, we have the amazing Miss Dawn Blagrove. Dawn Blagrove is an attorney and proud graduate of Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University and North Carolina Central School of Law. She obtained her Bachelor of Science degree in Political Science with a minor in secondary education, cum laude from FAMU, where she also obtained a master's degree, magna cum laude, in Applied Social Science. While in law school, Blagrove worked at Williams Mullen Law Firm, formerly Maupin Taylor, Wake County Public Defender's Office, and North Carolina Prisoner Legal Services. After graduating law school, Blagrove worked for 8 years as a post-conviction staff attorney with North Carolina Prisoner Legal Services, where she co-managed the jail credit team of 5 paralegals dedicated to jail credit issues. During this time, Blagrove evaluated and prioritized requests for criminal post-conviction representation from inmates incarcerated in North Carolina's Department of Corrections. On their behalf, she litigated motions for appropriate relief and petitions for writs of habeas corpus in North Carolina trial and appellate courts. Blagrove also litigated federal habeas actions in U.S. district courts in North Carolina, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, Virginia, and the Supreme Court of the United States. Today, Blagrove's experience as a post-conviction attorney, combined with her undergraduate training in secondary education, fuel her passion for educating youth and the public about challenges in the criminal justice system as executive director of the Carolina Justice Policy Center. Blagrove also serves as an adjunct professor for the Criminal Justice Department of Fayetteville Technical Community College. She has taught courses that include interviews and interrogations and introduction to criminal justice. She is also a proud co-sponsor of the Capital City chapter of Jack and Jill of America. She has been extremely busy, done some amazing work. Next, we have Miss Nicole Townsend, who, before I even introduce her, I want to invite you all to vote for her. In this next coming election. We definitely need individuals like her in city council. Nicole Townsend is unapologetically Black and queer. She believes in a world where people, regardless of identity, can live a full life that allows them to thrive in a way that feels true to who they are. She believes that no one is free until those who are Black, trans, queer, immigrant, and poor are free and able to live a life without being targeted. Currently, she serves the Asheville community as a board member of the Human Relations Council of Asheville, Bountiful Cities, and Asheville Writers in Schools and Communities. She's a member of CoThink, Grassroots Equity Alliance, and the YWCA Racial Justice Coalition. Her childhood experiences have undoubtedly shaped the ways in which she navigates this world, as the personal is very much so political. Her story is one of survival, resourcefulness, resiliency, perseverance, and determination. She doesn't believe that Black folks and those on the margins should have to pour out their trauma to validate their experiences, and she believes in the power of telling the truth. She is a survivor of both domestic and sexual violence, and her healing called for her to rely on reconciliation and justice that was not rooted in the carceral. Her family has been torn apart by the prison industrial complex, and she deeply believes that we must stop arresting our way justice and start addressing the issues of anti-Blackness, poverty, capitalism, and mental health. In September 2016, she found herself in the midst of the Charlotte uprising protesting the murder of Keith Lamont Scott. That was when she found Southerners on New Ground. It is within song, Southerners on New Ground, that she had the opportunity to co-facilitate the Southern Black Mamas bail actions, which is a part of a demand to end money bail and pretrial detention rooted in a national collective that has been able to get over 400 Black mothers and caregivers out of a cage. Okay, so that is our wonderful panelists. So I'm gonna go ahead and get into this thing. So the topic that brings us here today is decarceration, which, you know, me and everybody on this panel is extremely passionate about. The first question, you know, I would like to propose to you panelists is, why decarcerate? You know, you have individuals in public that feel that there's no need, that the justice system is there for a reason, and people have to be punished some type of way. So, you know, I'd like to get your responses on why decarcerate. And whoever would like to go first, just unmute yourself and speak.
All right, I'm already unmuted, so I'll go first. Decarceration is necessary, is doable, and is viable. That is the first premise we want to start with. It is not a esoteric concept or dream. It is doable and it is possible. And not only is it doable and possible, it is necessary, because the current system of mass incarceration that we have is really unsustainable. One of the things that the COVID virus has illuminated is the sheer unsustainability of the carceral system in the way that it exists in America right now. So what is the alternative? The alternative is create systems that make people whole, that protect people and make people feel safe, and create wraparound services that make sure that people stay whole from birth all the way through the end of their life's journey. With those kinds of services, and what does that look like? That looks like making sure that people have a living wage, making sure that people have decent housing, making sure that people have access to healthcare, making sure that people have access to mental health care, which is a huge problem for everybody. Once we divest from the carceral system and invest in the individual, the need for a carceral system as we have it right now becomes unnecessary, and the entire system of incarceration will ultimately become unnecessary. For those folks, and I'm not saying that there will become some utopian crime-free existence, but what I am saying is that the way that we help folks, we recognize, number one, that people who commit crimes are usually hurt people. Hurt other people, right? So if we can figure out ways to intervene and, as a society, invest in the person then we eliminate so much of the anger, the hate, the frustration, the addictions, the mental health issues that underlie what drives people to the criminal justice system in the first place. And we need to really reimagine what justice is and what justice feels like, and how each person is made whole if a crime is committed against them. So yeah, we need to decarcerate, because decarceration is an investment in a racist system, and invest in individual people. And when we invest in people and invest in the people of America, we will see that we do not need a carceral system in the way that it exists right now.
All right, Philip or Nicole, would you like to add any further thoughts?
Yeah. So first off, let me throw this out there, since the topic is decarceration, and yet in my professional bio, you heard me say that prison saved my life. So I do mean that when I say that prison saved my life, because I was an individual who was lost in the sauce. You know, I was doing the harder drugs before the rappers was making it cool to do at a young age. I was the outcast. So prison did save my life. But I had an experience in prison that's a lot different from everyone else. Anyone who has ever been to the youth spread, you know, it's hard for a person to grow when you go to Polk Youth Center or to any of those youth camps. It's hard for you to really rehabilitate. So let's just say that, you know, each person's prison experience is different. Now, we know the prisons are short-staffed, and we know COVID-19 has forced them to show that they can let people go. So we know it can be done. So when we're talking about decarceration and we're talking about letting people go, then we want to say, well, who is it we're going to let go? So why decarcerate is because we can. Hell, they done start letting people go already. So we know they can do it, right? So why decarcerate? Because it can be done when there's an emergency. And it's been an emergency whenever they told us that the prisons were short-staffed. The prisons are so short-staffed that everybody ain't even ordering their social security card before they get out. Yeah, they ain't even ordering their birth certificate ready for them before they get out. Yeah, they ain't even doing transfers right now before they get out. So if you so short-staffed to where you can't provide an efficient service for these people who are coming home to a horror movie, then that means we're in an emergency state for you to decarcerate. And if you can do it, then do it because of the emergency. And it's been an emergency. You feel me? Me and Sister Joanna was talking the other day, and she hit me with, she said, we have to have a sense of urgency before the emergency. And so now we see, and eyes are on the prison system now. Now we are looking to see the prison is short-staffed. That's a major reason why people aren't getting the services they need. And there's some people in there that can be let go, as evidenced by them letting people go now and reviewing 500 people to let go. They have let some go, but they're looking at 500 more people to let go, and they have a criteria listed of what they can let go. And if you can let go, then let go, because you're short-staffed, and you have verbalized that in rooms that I've been in with other professionals. So we all know that the prisons are short-staffed, and you need to let people go. So that's why I decarcerate, because you can.
Right. In agreement with everything that has already been said, and also just naming, like, it just doesn't make sense to put people in cages. Like, we weren't brought into this world to be put in cages. And when I think of decarceration, I think of it in two separate categories, right? So I see the policy side, and then I see the community side. And I think starting these conversations around decarceration, and literally like freeing everyone, means that as community, we get a chance to really cultivate deeper relationships with one another. We get a chance to actually learn what transformative justice means in practice. I think it's very easy for someone to pick up the phone and be like, hey, there's this strange person walking around my neighborhood. Can you come do a drive-through? Instead of being like, hello, friend who is walking in my neighborhood at 5 p.m. just enjoying your life. How are you, right? So I think like policing and punishment has really like torn us away from our own humanity and building relationships with one another. And I think this gives us an opportunity to also get in right relationship with one another. I think that that's a part of this conversation that we don't necessarily talk about. We talk a lot about policy demands and campaigns, which I'm 100% here for. But I think this is like an opportunity to really sit with our humanity in the ways in which it was ripped away from us, and really put the ownership on community as far as what justice looks like, and how people don't have to be punished for making a mistake. I also think I'm a big believer in following the money trail and understanding that prisons and jails are operating not for justice. Like, this is not about justice. This is about capital. This is about making people wealthy. And so it's like how many prisons can we build? And I'm also seeing the lies that are being told to rural America. A lot of prisons and institutions are going into the rural parts of our country and saying, hey, if we build this prison here, we get to bring jobs. We get to bring an $18 hour job. We get to invest in your water systems. And so when we look at decarceration, we also need to be like, what community support needs to be in place so that there is no excuse, or there is nothing that they can sell our people for putting this prison or putting this jail here. It's like, no, we have jobs for our people. No, we have a water system that works for our people. So I think of like all of those pieces as well as the policy piece. And once again, like, people just don't belong in cages. Like, we were not born into this world to be put into a cage. And it doesn't bring about justice. I use the example all the time. If someone comes and busts out the window in my car and I call the police on that person and they go to jail, my window's still broken. And now this person is ripped away from their family. And so neither one of us gets to win in that situation. And for me, justice is saying, hey, like, you busted out my window, I need you to fix it. And I don't want you to have to sit in jail over a window, really over anything.
Thank you so much for those powerful responses. Amazing. Next question. No, this is this is one of my triggers. Why are some people fine with the prison system? You know, and how do we address this? What are some actions we can take to, you know, shed some of the light on the history of prison, you know, where it started from, and kind of change this narrative that prison is a just form of punishment. You know, that individuals so-called deserve to be in prison. And whoever would like to start that one off, go ahead.
Well, I'll say, you know, we have to continue to tell the stories. I believe that COVID-19 has set us down long enough for us to, you know, some people that haven't been able to hear the stories are sitting down and teleworking and going in Zoom meetings. So now we need to start challenging those stakeholders to allow us to have a platform on their Zooms now. Like, you want to have a Chamber of Commerce and Workforce Development workforce board meeting. Okay, have a guest speaker come on there and talk to you about the reality of incarceration and the pipeline to prison, but also this being a pipeline of people that can come and work at your companies, because there are some people who don't want to work right now because of with the you know, the unemployment that's coming in, and they're just not wanting to go into something else right now. They can be at home with their families and they can get their unemployment and they're not ready to take on another job, but these companies are still having to do some hiring. So with them looking at this population, they also need to get some education, you know, because some people really don't, they don't know what's going on with the prison system. But when you tell them a story, like there's still people that don't know that it costs to live in a halfway house. Like, you wouldn't believe how many people I have to tell that people getting out of prison aren't staying in halfway houses for free. And when I tell them how much they pay a month, they're like, oh my gosh, are you serious? And then when I tell them some of them can't get food stamps because of certain drug charges, like, are you kidding me? What do they expect them to do? And then the next thing you know, you have an ally. Shout out to my people at East Fork Pottery. You know what I'm saying? Whenever I gave them the narrative and they seen the real stories, the next thing you know, they're a major fair chance employer and they're about that life. But it took them sitting down and having that conversation. So I think one of the key moves for us to do this is going to have to continue to tell the stories, especially while people are sitting down long enough to listen. Because, you know, some people that don't have someone in their family that has ever been incarcerated, they don't get it. Like, they really don't get it. Like, some people think we wear stripes in prison. Ain't nobody wearing no black and white stripes in prison, bro. Like, they ain't even wearing that in jail. That's like on the cartoon with Tom and Jerry. Bro, you gonna get an orange jumpsuit or a beige jumpsuit. You know what I'm saying? People don't know nothing about no jail, but we got to tell them the stories and give them the real life experiences so that we can touch their hearts.
So I'm going to jump in quickly because I think part of the answer to your question was literally just illustrated. We have got to center justice-involved people in the middle of that narrative shift so that they can actually tell their own stories about what happens on the inside. That has got to happen. And because here's the reality. If I don't know any formerly incarcerated people, if I don't know any people who are currently incarcerated, then it is very easy for me to dehumanize them, to place them in a bucket of otherness, right? So what we have to do, those of us who are on the inside, those of us who have never been on the inside, have to center those folks who have been behind the wall and let them tell their stories. And then we need to be strong allies to them. We need to be able to use the privilege that we have to bring those folks to the table where otherwise they wouldn't be welcome. That's the first thing, is centering people who have real lived experience about the justice system. The second thing we have to do, though, seriously, is change the narrative. Listen, I have a 16-year-old daughter, a 20-year-old daughter who's home from college right now. My husband is a nurse. I've been doing this work, it feels like my whole life, but I still have to have conversations, even with the people in the house, about why we do not need carceral systems. And as an example, yesterday at News Correctional, which is one of the hardest hit correctional institutions in the entire country with COVID, I received an envelope with 6 letters in it from 6 folks who are incarcerated. Each one of them explaining why they need to go home, why they are afraid, how and why their needs aren't being met. And as I was reading the letters, I was sitting with my 20-year-old, and she says to me, "Mommy, people need to hear those stories." Baby, I know. That's it. Because once you hear the stories, once you have to be forced with the humanity of folks who are behind the wall and folks who have been formerly incarcerated, then it is almost impossible for you to hold the position that these people are any different from us, are any less worthy than the rest of us to have full lives. No one should be judged by the worst day that they ever had for the rest of their life. And if any of us were held to that same standard, there would be no sense of humanity at all. And we're very close there anyways, but that's another conversation. But the reality is that we need to make folks see the humanity of people who are incarcerated and who are formerly incarcerated. And we need to make sure that we are centering people who have real lived experience in the middle of that narrative shift.
Very deep. Oh, Nicole, would you like to add in on that one?
I think I'm here for what was said. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, that was deep. Okay, next question. Is it possible to take a system that was made to oppress and reform it? Reform, abolition, you know, are we reforming the system, or are we looking to abolish it? Yeah, I'm leaning towards abolition. Well, yeah, I'll let you guys chime in on that one.
Burn it down, y'all. Like, and I say that in this way of, I think reforming something means that we are going back to, so Rob, you and I get into an argument, we're no longer working together, we hate each other. We sit down to do a reformative justice session because prior to our incident, we actually had a relationship. We actually had something that was good, right? Transformative justice, like, why would I, like, that is transforming the whole situation. And so when I think of abolition and I think of transformation, it doesn't just end with like, okay, the prisons and jails are empty. The system was never meant to heal us, right? And so I don't trust this system to say, okay, y'all, we've changed a few things. We're now letting people actually see their family in person during visitations. We're no longer charging for phone call, right? So when I think of reform, I think of things like, and Lord, I may get some flack for this, but I think of like Jay-Z, who is just like, hey, let's give everyone ankle monitors because at least they get to be home with their families. Because to me, that is still incarceration, right? And so I think as we have to be very careful as we do this work, because what happens is when we say things like, let's get people out of prisons, let's get people out of jails, the first thing that a lot of people will start talking about is, okay, let's just give them an ankle monitor and we're good, like we can clear a whole jail. And so that to me is reform, and it's still incarceration. And I also think like there's nothing to reform to, right? Like we've never had a relationship with the justice system. Like it's not meant to serve us. And I just think that this is the point where, and it's just interesting that we're in this place right now in our world where we are actually seeing some of our demands like flourish under this. And we're being shown that a lot of this stuff doesn't matter. It never really made sense anyway. Like they're like, we're releasing people. And so we're seeing those things unravel now. And so I say abolition because I will say it forever. It doesn't make sense to hold people in bondage. And I think abolition also means meeting the needs of the people, right? So it's not just about free people and let it go. It's about meeting the needs of the people on a very communal level and allowing the communities to figure out what justice is for them. So no reform, abolition.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy we have to even use the word abolition. I mean, slavery's supposed to be over, right? Except for Rome. I guess the prison system is new age slavery. You know, the slave patrols is where it really started into the version that it is today, you know, where they were locking up minorities for supposedly not having work. That's a deep discussion. Would you like to chime in on this one, Phillip?
Well, I believe that prison saved my life. But like I said, it's about the programs that's on the inside. And the reason why I say that is because I needed structure. I needed to have a job that I could go to see that I could work and have a work ethic. And the first job I ever had the first promotion I ever got was in prison. Like I went from road squad to dorm janitor. I went from 70 cents a day to $1 a day. But, prison gave me a work ethic. While I was in there, I got that work ethic. While I was in there, I took the drug treatment class, A New Direction. But like I say, the prisons that I was at, they had those programs. Not all prisons have those programs. So as far as the reform in comparison to abolish, I would lean more towards reform first, because the people that are in there right now, like if we're gonna make some noise, I think we could make some noise with the realistic expectation to hold the prison system accountable. Because people can go in there and get a trade. I know a lot of brothers that go to the feds and they come out on fire. You hear me? But in the feds, they got way better programs and they're consistent and they take care of their people. And when they release them, they don't release them straight to the streets. Guess what they release them to? A halfway house. And who pays for the halfway house? The federal government. You feel me? With the state, they release you to the streets. They just release you to the streets. And then the halfway houses have a cost. So I believe first we can reform and put the microscope on the reentry services, because once we start, let's say once we decarcerate, we're gonna start saving some money. The Justice Reinvestment Act showed us that we could save some money. So what do we do with those resources? I believe they hired a whole bunch of probation officers, but I think we could do something different. We could have put more money into reentry programs, not just upskill. Look at joint peer recovery. Look at, we could 36 bands a year. What is it on average? 36 bands a year to incarcerate one person? That's, we could put that into reentry programs, job trainings. I understand CDLs is, some of the people in workforce development say the CDLs is going to be go over and done with 20 years from now. I'm talking about today. Let these people get CDLs, let them get back to doing the electricians and plumbing and all of these different blue collar trades that they can be doing on the inside, and they come out and then they got a skill. They can have portable credentials when they come out, and they can get jobs. So I would lean more towards reform for now, but I'm with y'all as far as abolishing the whole system. But I do got to keep it all the way 100 and say that, I was breaking the law, and they need to sit my black ass down. Because I'm telling you, I was coming for all y'all. When I was on it, you can get it.
But you know what? The reason that you were coming for us is not because you were born a criminal. It's because you lived in an environment, in a society that was not willing to invest in the talents and the skills that you were born with. That's why you was coming for us. You wasn't coming for us because you liked it. You was coming for us because you needed that. That is where your mentality was. And oh my God, don't even get me started. We don't have to go to prison. We don't have to go to prison to find our power, to find your skill set. That is an unnecessary step, and it is a destructive step. That is not necessary. The trades that you're talking about, we could put them in high schools. You know what? Because they used to be in high schools. Remember, some of us, y'all young, but some of us remember when there used to be high schools where you could take mechanics, where you could take shop, where you could take plumbing classes. There was a whole career tract was built into our educational system that helped people go into vocational work and to help people who were headed to higher ed. We just have to, again, I cannot stress enough, we need to invest, we need to divest from this system that says people are born broken, right? And we need to invest in building people. If we invest in building people, the divestment from the carceral system happens naturally. It's easy. You don't have to go to prison to learn a trade or to keep a job. If somebody had gave you a job, you would have known that before you got there, right? Yeah. It's not like prison didn't turn you into a good worker. You would have been a good worker anywhere. Now, again, I'm not saying that you don't need that discipline.
Yeah, and that's what
you do need that discipline. But again, that's about investing in the whole person, right? Because people who have a future don't mess up their future. People who believe that they are going somewhere, that they have something to lose, are invested in themselves. But if you believe, as society tells you, that you have no redeemable qualities, that there is nothing redeemable about you, that there is nothing valuable about you, then you have nothing to lose. You don't even value your own life, so you don't invest in your own life, right?
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with what you're saying 100%. But my experience was I wasn't thinking about working. The environment that I was living in, working was not attractive to me. I didn't see that and it goes deeper. It definitely goes deeper than prison with what you were saying. Like, you had value from birth. I agree. But that's another thing that we have to take into consideration, specifically when we talk about the black male. What a pops was at. Now, my daddy came back into my life. It was spotty because, he was one in the crack epidemic, you know what I'm saying? But he got his life right. But I was in high school by then, and I had identified who my role models were. But it's a lot of people that don't have that. So, even in high school, if they had the shop class, if they don't have that discipline attached to it, then they won't take it serious. But like when you go in the sticks, like in Pisgah and Inca, you got Pawpaw and Uncle Jed, who's encouraging you to take this shop class that goes into an apprenticeship that ends up getting you a job at GE Aviation. You feel me? But see, we don't have that a lot of times, that extra encouragement to do those things. And we take, and a lot of us, we take that other route. It's not because we don't value ourselves. It's just that that's what's closest to us, and that's what we identify as being success.
And and I'm sorry, this ain't a just me and you conversation, I know, but I feel like it's important for us to hash this out in front of folks, right? So again, I'm gonna say to you that if Pop and Uncle Jed wasn't in prison where they shouldn't have been in the first place, they would have been in your communities. They would have been in your community. They would have been around you. And let me be clear. You heard all my credentials, all my fancy credentials, but what's not included in my fancy credentials is that my father was a full-on crackhead. Hear me? College educated, but we all slept with our jewelry on in the house, because if you didn't, he would take it and sell it. Do you understand what I'm saying? I hear what you're saying. I know where you're from. The difference in my life was that I had people around me who looked at me and said, your life has value, and constantly poured into me that I had a future to lose, right? What we need to do is make sure that every human being is being poured into and made to understand that they have a future to lose. Because if you have a future to lose, you protect it.
Yeah, I'll add into that as well. If you take a step back and look at the whole system, you realize that what you explaining, Phillip, you already know where I was at, bro. Same situation, same mindset. It was all by design. You know, the environment we grew up in, bro. I mean, nature shows and proves. If you have a flower and you give it the right nutrients, sunlight, water, environment, that flower grows up the way it's supposed to be. You feed the flower some bull, you know what I'm saying? The flower is going to be malnutritious, ain't going to produce the type of fruit that it's supposed to. And we were systematically put in these environments, bro. We can change that. We don't need the carceral system like we need it right now. Of course, there'll be some individuals that do some heinous crimes, but individuals being incarcerated at the level of incarceration, at the rate of incarceration what's going on right now is completely unnecessary if we change the root causes.
That's right.
The structural, systemic, institutional systems that we are placed in from birth. I mean, your area code, the zip code that you born in already has so many determinants on how your life is going to turn out for the next 15 years. Is crazy. Like, these systems are, like I said, it was all by design, bro. You know, and I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. You know, I'm agreeing with everybody. I just want to throw that out there because, you know, me and you, we from the same type of mindset. And it's like, I still don't see the necessity of incarcerating people. You know, I changed my life in there, but I went completely against what I was witnessing in there, bro. Like, you know, me and you, like you said, you know, we was different. Now that first bid I did was different. You was at Pope, I was at Pope. You know, you got to be a wolf. You either a wolf or a sheep in there. You feel me? You know, so that was a whole nother story. But, you know, my adult bid or whatever, I was able to focus on me and change me. But that was because of me. That was not because of the prison system. They did not give me the tools. I had to order books. I had to do this on my own. I had to separate myself from the negativity that was going on around me in there. You know what I'm saying? And I could have did that on the outside. Before I went in there, I was actually open to that. And I couldn't find it then. Could not find it at all, bro. I was forced back into what I was doing. You know, but yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. We're heading to the next question. Does house arrest / monitoring, and Nicole Townsend briefly touched on this one. Does house arrest / monitoring change the system at all, or does this open doors to a new way of oppression?
The reality is, it's just another form of enslavement. Just like prison is a form of enslavement, and it's the same. It is. Ankle monitoring is the same societal control, right, that birthed slavery that birthed the carceral system as we know it, that birthed, that birthed the death penalty for that matter. It is all about controlling Black and brown bodies, period, right? What we have to do is stop allowing the state to control Black and brown bodies, period. House arrest is another way that is done. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not saying that that we should just throw open the gates of all the prisons, throw open all the cages, and let people find their own way, because we don't have a society where that works. To dismantle and abolish necessarily means that we reinvest in the people who are there and build people. That's what it has to mean. The two don't work without each other, right? There are folks who are so deeply vested. There are people who have been oppressed for so long and so deeply that they don't even know or recognize the oppression in which they live in, right? We got to free minds and souls first, then we can build folks. Right? That is a necessary step. So we can't say that we just gonna open the doors and throw away the key and then let folks just be out to their own resources. We broke these people as a society, so we are required, we are obligated to rebuild them and to make them whole. Other forms of incarceration and parole and probation, ankle monitoring, those are all forms of incarceration. They're just packaged differently. We have got to take the state control off of individual people. We have got to change our mindset that we should even have the power to control other people, to control their movements. We don't own these folks. And because we don't own them, we should not be monitoring them. And if we are doing right by them as a society, you don't have to, right? That's what we got to change. We got to reinvest in people. So no, ankle monitoring is just as bad as, well, it's not just as bad as being inside, but it is only a different version of the same oppression.
Anybody would like to add to that as well?
Well, as far as the ankle monitor is concerned, we can get rid of the whole ankle monitor. You know what I'm saying? If my little cousin wasn't in here, I would have said the 4-letter word that starts with an F as far as the ankle monitors are concerned. A good friend of mine, rest in peace to my homeboy. You know, I want to be real careful with how much information I put out on this call. But Rob, we and you have talked about my friend who died, and we have reason to believe it had something to do with it being too tight and not getting to a proper response. Miss Blagrove, I might need to talk to you a little bit at a later time about that. But what I will say is, if we reinvest the money in a different way, and if we're going to decarcerate, we save those a lot of money to put into reentry programs, and we be intentionally inclusive with staffing these reentry programs and have that accountability look like us, right? Nothing about us without us. And we get these programs in place, I don't think people will need an ankle bracelet, because they'll have the support that they need, man. You wouldn't believe how many people I work with now in the city of Asheville that I know, that I grew up with and everything. When they come home and they get the proper support, like, they don't want to be outside at nighttime. Like, I get nervous at night now for some reason. Like, it used to be I wake up at nighttime, like, what's popping? Now it's like, man, it's getting dark outside. Hell, you know? So a lot of the people that I know, when they have the support they need, don't nobody need no ankle bracelet. So they need to reinvest. I'm telling you, man, y'all need, man, that Justice Reinvestment Act made us have I want to say it was like 165 million. I was rocking with Darryl Atkinson them, and they gave me a little t-shirt. Now, if we want to really, really get down to the nitty gritty and we reinvest some of that money, I'm telling you right now, they'll need less probation officers, and they for damn sure won't need to know daggone ankle monitors.
Would you like to add in, Nicole? Yeah, I think they pretty much explain that as deep as it can get.
Now look, we need to hear from Nicole. If she's gonna be quiet, we at least got to get her to sing that one song she sung at Co-Think.
Oh. All right, next question. We getting to the end of this thing. What does decarceration look like on the other side? You know, what sort of spaces are needed for holistic integration? And you all have touched so much on this already. It may not even be a whole lot you can add. You know, wraparound services. I mean, y'all have went in depth touching on this question already. But if you have anything else you'd like to add to it, please feel free to go ahead.
I love this question because I think it gives us the space to like dream. And I'm always reminded of two things, one of which the system that harms us will never heal us. And we would be a fool to believe that that's true. And I remember sitting in a convening and a friend of mine was like, when the colonizers came to kill us, they had a dream. We need to make sure our dream is bigger and stronger than theirs. And our dream has to be one of healing, of transformation, of bringing families back together. And when I think of this notion of what is it going to look like? What do we need? I know I mentioned this earlier of we need our policy people, we need our people in the inside, and we also as communities need to be doing our things away from that, right? So we need to be building alternatives. I think a lot about how a lot of people are really throwing down into mutual aid work as COVID-19 is here. That can't go away when shelter in place is over, right? Like we need to continue to find ways to support one another outside of institutions. We need to make sure that our people are taken care of. And I think a lot about not just jails and prisons, but the whole complex, right? So I think about schools, I think about my nephews all the time being like elementary school Black boys who have resource officers, right? And so thinking about all the different layers in which people have a role, right? So there's gonna be people in our lives who are like, I am not gonna fight abolition. That's just not my thing, but they may have kids who are constantly getting in trouble at school or constantly having to go to the resource officer. And so it's about working with people to find their lane in this work, because abolition, there is a role for all of us. And prisons and policing impacts every single one of us. Even if we don't see it, it impacts us all. When people are snatched up from our communities, it hurts our communities. And so I think about the alternatives all the time, right? I think about investing in community healing. You and that person who haven't talked since 1984 and still have beef, we need you to heal. Like there's like no, like we need you to heal. You don't got to be BFFs, but we need you to at least be able to like not cuss each other out when you walk down the street. And so I think about these individual or interpersonal ways in which we need to be healing. I think about nonprofits who in their mission statement talk a lot about poor people and Black and brown people and pushing them to actually invest in communities healing. We don't need another program, y'all. We've had programs for a very long time. Like we need to invest in people's healing. And I also believe in radical imagination. I don't believe anything is too big. And I think this is the time, this is a moment where we actually need to start making our demands clear. We need to start actually like rooting ourselves deep in community, deeper in community, outside of institutions. And when I hear divest, I think of divesting from all of the entities that lead us into the PIC beast, right? So mental health institutions. I think of, I'm just still stuck on this part about resource officers, right? Because a lot of our nonprofits and a lot of our schools, we bring police officers to our schools and then our kids go home and see those same police officers over policing their neighborhoods. And so I think we need to like really be conscious of that, of like no more ice cream with a cop, and acknowledging that many of our cousins are cops, right? Many of our people we love are cops, and so it's about the system and not the individual, right? So when you take off your uniform and you're at the cookout, we're cool, come to the cookout, right? But like you're not having ice cream with our kids at the school. And so I think about all these things, and I think about dreaming, and really having those conversations. I'm gonna stop rambling, but having these conversations with our neighbors and the people in our lives about why these systems don't need to exist. And if you're connected to people who are in decision-making positions around incarceration or whatever, like have conversations with them. Don't be afraid to have some words thrown at the summer barbecue. It's okay. Like talk about it. So yeah.
Thank you for that, Nicole. Would anybody else like to add on to that question? The next question, what are other societies doing that can model an alternative system? You know, I'm not too keen on the term reformative or restorative justice, anything transformative, you know, transform it. But you know, what are some examples of things that are being done differently than how we do them that maybe we could look into as a future for us?
Well, is this when we saying we, are we talking Buncombe County? Are we talking North Carolina? Or are we talking USA?
All right, let's say more specifically North Carolina, or you could say USA, because there are some amazing things being done in you know, South America, for example, with their justice system.
Well, dang, I was hoping you was gonna say Buncombe, man. Cause
Right,
cause man, listen, man, we tripping in Buncombe, bro. You feel me? Like all my counterparts across the state that look like me, that's at the table at planning and implementation, that ain't happening in Buncombe County. You hear me? We got the same old nonprofits, buddy system. You feel me? People that are scared to say what need to be said when they in the room with all the people that you need to say it to.
Say that.
So I want to start with Buncombe, because you feel like, because I want to see something. I want to see something now. And we know for a fact that in Buncombe, the amount of local dollars that have went into reentry services is unacceptable. Based on the number of people we have coming home from prison a year, it's unacceptable. So I would love to start that with Buncombe, and we could start with scaling up programs like the FIT program. And we in infancy stages of some of this stuff with conversations, but there's some great programs in Durham. There's some great programs in Mecklenburg County. There's some great programs in Western Salem. And I think we need to step up our game as far as the investing in the people, the Black and brown people who have nonprofits, who know how to serve our people, because we identify with our people the most, especially in Buncombe County, because we're dealing with a real monster in Western North Carolina. A Black man, what was our unemployment rate? 27% returning citizens. And then in Buncombe County, we pride ourselves on talking about having the lowest unemployment rate in the state, but then the returning citizens struggling like that. And we ain't even included in that unemployment rate, as a matter of fact, if you want to be real. So let's start with Buncombe, if you ask me, and let's start scaling up some of the things that they're doing across the state. But overall, the topic of conversation with decarceration, I can't say that I'm too keen on any other things that are happening in other countries or in other states outside of, you know, what they're doing in Washington, D.C. with the Office of Returning Citizen Affairs, and in Boston they have an Office of Returning Citizen Affairs. So their mayor, it's in the mayor's office, the mayor's Office of Returning Citizen Affairs. You feel me? So, I mean, if local government want to follow suit like that, we have tangible tactics if they want to invest in the solution.
And we was in the process of getting that started out here before the coronavirus.
Yeah.
You specifically, you know, you invited me to the table on that, brother, you know. So, but yeah, anybody else, please chime in.
So yeah, I think as a perfect transition from what the last guy was saying, I can't remember your name, love. I'm sorry. It's all local. Politics are local. The power, you want to change the way your criminal justice system looks, you change it locally. We can look to the power, the most powerful person inside of the criminal justice system is a district attorney. That is a person that we elect locally, okay? In North Carolina, at least a third, probably more than that, and I should know the number and I don't, but probably more than that, have district attorneys in we have 51 prosecutorial districts in North Carolina. Of those 51 district attorneys, almost none of them are actively challenged when election time comes around. Emancipate NC is an organization that I run, and one of the things that we do when we're not all locked down our homes is go out into communities and educate people about the roles of district attorneys, of sheriffs, and of your locally elected city council. Because if you have a problem with police accountability, the people you need to talk to are your locally elected city council folks, because those are the people that hire and fire your chief of police. You have a concern about the way people are being housed inside of your county jails, that is your sheriff. There's nobody else who oversees what happens inside of your jails except for your locally elected sheriff. You want to make sure, good gracious, you want to see bail reform. You want to see less people incarcerated. You want to see sentencing reform. You want to see reinvestment in diversion programs away from keeping people directly into the carceral system and having permanent records. You want to see stronger reentry. You elect a DA that believes in those things. You elect a district attorney that believes in those things. You will see those things happen. You can look to Durham right now in North Carolina, the only district attorney in North Carolina that is actively working with defense attorneys and with the activist community to get people out of overcrowded out of overcrowded prisons in North Carolina is Satana DePerry out of Durham. The only one. Not Wake, not Mecklenburg, Durham, right? You talked about how Asheville won't let y'all at the table. And we have a whole lot of places in North Carolina where people like to pretend like they're very progressive, but when push comes to shove, they really aren't. Asheville is one of those places. Wake County is another place. Yeah. Buncombe is very much a place that likes to call itself very, very progressive. But when it comes down to policies, when it comes down to changing people's lives, not so much. Wake County is very much the same way. Probably Wake County is, don't know Wake County. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make is you want to change the way your system looks right now. Start finding people to run for these offices. Find somebody to run for a district attorney. Find somebody to run for your Miss Nicole, wherever she running, vote for her. Right? Because you want a person like Nicole who has your same belief systems about investing in people and divesting in carceral systems. You need those people in places of power. And in local elections, you are talking about, you can change the whole dynamic of your city council or county commissioner board by sometimes as few as 250 votes. Because they're local elections, that pond is small. It's about knowing these numbers and understanding how the numbers work and finessing the numbers to our favor. Now, those folks who are in power, they know how to work those numbers. They know how those numbers look. They know how many people they got to get to the polls. And the reason the rest of us don't know is not because we have that information is intentionally obfuscated. It is intentionally hidden from us so that we do not know the power that we have. My organization is fully dedicated to making sure that every individual understands and knows the power that they have to change the way politics look locally. And if you change the way your politics look locally, you change everything.
Okay, that was wonderful. Thank you for that, done. Thank you for that, Nicole. Thank you for that change, Agent Cooper. Now we're getting ready to go into the breakout groups, the open space. We went a little bit over, but that was a very deep conversation, and I think we got to the meat of the topic. You know, how do we change these systems? We all have the power already. Electing the right public officials, plain and simple. Okay. So are we?
Yeah, I can introduce our breakout session moment now too. Thank you so much, Rob. And again, thank you to all the panelists for setting the stage for some deeper conversation and for really lifting up this important conversation. Super grateful and happy to be here with you all. My name is Larissa Lopez. I'm one of the core organizers of Just Us. And really, I just want to, I think we're all sitting with so many new threads of inquiry and insight right now, and maybe some old ones that have been brought back up to light. And so I really want to invite us to dive into now, what some of those threads of emotion, of practice, of principle are that we want to speak more to. So what we're going to do is facilitate kind of an open space approach where basically we want to let it be participant led, let you all decide where you kind of want to go from here, what topics you want to dive deeper into. And so I want to start with our panelists first and invite you all to name any topics you would like to dive in deeper into. And what we can do is do this in breakout rooms. And so that approach is, we're all in one big room right now, and then Zoom has this function where we can go out into smaller rooms based on topics of interest, and then we'll spend some time in there, about 15 minutes, to dive into those topics that you all decide you want to go deeper into, and then come back out and share out so we can hear from each other. And then, of course, this is to really, dive deeper into this conversation, but this, the goal of this gathering is really for it to be an outcome and action-based gathering. So we want to continue to capture everyone's attention, everyone's enthusiasm for this topic so that we can make those actions and those outcomes come to life, right? So I'm going to drop in the chat box the contact form one more time so that we can get your information so y'all can get the recording, the notes, and stay engaged with next steps, because this is not the end. As Nicole said, we all have a role to play, and so let's definitely identify that role and find our best way to play it. So I'm going to drop that in here. And then I'm going to invite us all to take a minute and kind of sit with how we're feeling right now and what is rising to the top of our minds and to the top of our hearts that we want to dive into deeper. It could be an action, it could be a topic, an issue, a question, just, any thread of inquiry that you have right now. So I'm going to set a timer for a minute so we can all pause to decide where we want to go to next. And then when we come back, I'm going to invite our panelists to start and then open it up to everyone else. So I'm going to start a minute and then we'll have a chime come on when it's time. All right, that was a minute. So now I want to invite our panelists first to say if they want to be a host of any of these breakout rooms. And then it could be, like I said, a question, a topic, and you don't necessarily have to be the expert. You could just be committed to opening the space, and ultimately what happens there is going to be co-created with whoever else is in the space with you. So I'm opening the floor up now.
Does anybody have any further topics or questions you would like to, present to the panelists around decarceration? You can unmute yourself and ask them.
I have something. It's Savannah.
Sure, Savannah.
We kind of talked about this a little bit, but could we maybe talk more about like the relationship between prisons being built and like jobs and like the environment, and how those things play into how they're kind of sold to people, maybe?
Sure. So more about like capitalizing and like how people are building wealth off of the system.
Yeah, and like how people think that they're like beneficially brought in their communities, and like what it means, and like what types of effects are there. Because like when a prison's brought into your community, what like happens?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is it not a positive thing for people?
Okay. I will start a group based on that. I'm going to write it in the chat here. What happens when a prison is brought into the community?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Savannah. Anyone else have something there?
I got a question.
Yeah.
So when she did say building prisons, so we got to be mindful of how different state and federal. It's a big difference between the two. And if we are talking about building state prison, we need to keep in mind that they already short staffed. So I'm wondering where they're gonna get the staff from, because they can't staff the ones they already got.
True. So you think that, Philip, would that be part of that same conversation?
Yes, and I was just throwing that out there for Savannah, so she would know about that. Like even in that conversation, in that group, whenever they're having that conversation, to make sure that that's mentioned about the inability to staff the ones we already have.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tara. I have something. I don't honestly really feel strongly about talking about this in the moment, but I'm happy to if people want to, but it's like a whole thing I'm interested in working on long term. I feel like we're sort of in a moment that I think we all kind of acknowledge that a lot of the people who are in jails and prisons who really don't need to be there are nonviolent nonviolent drug offenders. And as you know, addiction has ravaged white communities. There are a lot more white people like, wait, you don't deserve to go to jail for opiates or whatever, and that there's maybe a lot more common ground than there used to be. And I also know here in Asheville, there's a really big recovery community, but from what I see, it's super white. And so I think all of those things might have space to work together. Like what are, you know, alternative to incarceration treatments for substance abuse and that kind of thing. And, you know, what does good recovery look like and who is it accessible to? Because, you know, Mr. Cooper brought up, you know, halfway houses and that kind of thing costs a lot of money. It seems like a lot of white people get to get treatment, but not a lot of people of color. But there are things that are free, like 12 steps, but they also have problems like racism and segregation. So all of that.
Yeah, so yeah, alternatives to recovery treatments. And I wonder if folks are all curious about all these issues, we could also have one big conversation about collective action and moving all of these pieces forward. Because the other thing I realize is these are really interconnected pieces. And so, you know, like Phillip brought up a great point about you can't think about what it is for it to come into your community and for people to build wealth off of it without trying to address some of the workforce things that they try and spin off when they do introduce it. And then I think it also plays into recovery treatments. Like I would imagine if you're saying, we need to put prisons here because of the increase in addiction, but you know, this isn't being addressed as an alternative, then I can see it overlapping. So I want to pose that as well. I dropped in Tara's topic, but if we all think that we want to do it as a large conversation, I'm also open to that.
I'm down to stay together. I think it's all intersectional.
Yeah.
We're staying together, yeah.
Okay. Any other themes that we want to lift up, and then we can kind of cover them all and start a little parking lot?
Yeah, I have one, which I think is kind of local, state, national, but I feel like understanding what's possible now in regards to policy shifts, because I feel like there's a whole re-education, at least on my part, I'll speak for myself, but also how I can be an advocate and really helping others connect with what they need to know about navigating policy and also our constitutional rights. There are a lot of constitutional rights that are at risk in this moment with COVID-19 that we, you know, in focusing on this being a public health crisis, we're not having a conversation about it actually being an economic crisis, you know, and the disproportionate impact that that's going to have on communities of color. And so this is a moment to mobilize. And I'm curious what the panelists have to say about what are our priorities, you know, in mobilizing, and what are the platforms and the tools, because I want to think down to nitty-gritty details of like literally if there are platforms we need to be using, petitions we need to be getting signed, like what are those steps so that we can move something forward, because I feel a sense of urgency around that personally.
And I'm summarizing that in the chat. So re-education, so that we can navigate policy shifts and understanding our rights, and then what are our priority action steps. And then I would add to that too, as my inquiry, and you know, Cortina touched on this, but given everything that has come to light with the coronavirus situation and all of the urgency that comes with that, how does that play into like what we need to be getting educated on first, and what has to happen first and foremost, you know, to tend to those needs? And I think if no one else has something major, we can get started, because these are all pretty major topics. So I don't want to take up too much time, but I'd love to hear from our panelists and our facilitator, because Rob is also a wealth of experience and knowledge.
I'm thinking a lot about the narrative and how, well, one, just naming without, I don't know, definitely taking COVID-19 seriously, and naming that Black and Brown folks have, since colonization, have always lived in crisis. And so I don't want this moment to erase that. And not be, I want to hold the two things as true. And when I think about some of the things we talked about, such as ankle monitors, I think about the times that I've had in court watching. So you can show up to a court and literally go sit there and watch things happen. And where pre-COVID-19, I've had issues with bailiffs telling me I'm not allowed in their courtroom until always bring a lawyer with you, right? Until you have your friend who pulls out their card and is like, I'm a lawyer, and they let you walk in, right? So I see that COVID-19 is going to shift some things and say that, and folks are gonna, in the justice system, are gonna say, well, we're doing this as precautions, because remember COVID-19? So what I see coming down the pike that we need to go ahead and put on our forefront is people making some kind of mass movement for ankle monitors. So we can say, well, we have a lower population in the jails and prisons. So should we have another pandemic, we won't be as overcrowded. I also see coming on the pipe an increased number of solitary confinement spaces within prisons and jails, because they're going to say, well, if we have another pandemic, we can make sure people are separated more. And so I think these are things that it just wouldn't surprise me if we see a push for ankle monitors go further than what it has, as well as more solitary confinement. So those are things that I think should be on people's radars, especially as we're talking about the narrative, and the things we talked about today is like, no, we don't want those things. And for folks to be willing to put pressure when that conversation comes up, because post COVID-19, those two things are something that I think that we will see coming up. And I'm sure, I wouldn't be surprised if folks are already like figuring out how to make this happen in their counties and in their prisons.
So I'll piggyback on that. Yeah, those are definitely, I think I hadn't even really thought about I hadn't even thought about the response to COVID creating more space inside of prisons for social distancing. Lord have mercy, I hadn't even considered that. That's doing something to my soul. All right, so what the other things on the other end, I think some of the things that we need to be looking at and thinking about as we move forward, because this is a conversation that I've been having a lot with my peers and my cohorts who do advocacy work and who do policy work, is capturing some of these wins that have been necessitated because of COVID, and making sure that when we get on the other side of this crisis, that people don't forget the things that happened successfully during this crisis. For example, I have worked with folks for a very long time trying to create effective bail reform in North Carolina, and have been told as recently as last month that it was just undoable, right? We can't do it. We cannot possibly reduce the number of people that we have in jails, because there would be anarchy in the streets. This society would completely break down. We have got to keep these poor people in these cages until COVID-19 came, and everybody was like, oop, maybe we don't have to keep these people in cages. And we saw within literally a matter of 2 weeks, some of these rural counties reduced their jail numbers by half, more than half. Once they did a reassessment of who needed to be held pretrial and who didn't, there were lots and lots of people who they were able to let go real easy, right? So we have to make sure that people remember that we can do that, because in a matter of 2 weeks, we damn near cleared out jails in North Carolina. If we could do it because of COVID, then it is doable as a policy, as a long-term policy. We did not see huge increases in crime. We did not see huge increases in anything other than keeping those numbers low and minimizing the number of people who are exposed to the virus through congregate living. We are fighting, my organization and several others are fighting very, very hard to get our prisons, get Governor Cooper to be forced to let at least 10% of the people that are inside of our prisons right now out. There are 35,000 people in prison in North Carolina right now. There are so many of them, we have identified at least 3,000 to 4,000 of them who are either within a year of release, who have already been approved for work release, which means they're already safe. We've already decided that they're safe enough to be out and work for free, right? Then why can't they go home? People who are over 65, people who are immunocompromised. There are lots and lots of people who just should not be in prison. right? That if we just start with the low hanging fruit and let those folks go, it would make it safer for everybody else inside. But I also want us to have a real conversation about, in this particular moment, about this false distinction between violent and nonviolent offenders. Because let me say this about that. I've talked to, I can't tell you how many how many incarcerated people I have spoken to over the last several weeks. I talked to a guy a couple weeks ago who told me, who is 45 years old, has been in prison for 26 years, who is convicted of armed robbery, which would be considered a violent crime, right? So he would not be eligible under DPS's current plan for trying to reduce his populations because of COVID. He wouldn't be eligible. Again, this man has been in prison for 26 years. He is 45 years old, so the vast majority of his adult life. He committed an armed robbery where no one was hurt. And what he stole was a gold ring and $600. That's your violent criminal. That's what most of your violent criminals look like. I think, and even still, how about this? I talked to a guy who committed a murder when he was 18, right? He's been in prison for 30 years, and has not killed another person in 30 years. I think he could go home. I think he would be all right. I feel safe with him being on the streets. He has served 30 years in prison without killing another person. I think it is safe to say he is not a mass murderer. He is not he is no Ted Bundy, right? But did he commit a violent crime? Yes, the most violent of crimes. But is 30 years enough? I think we can argue that it is, right? So we've got to have some real conversations about the necessity of keeping people in prison for the length of time that we are keeping them there, right? Because for 30 years, this same dude, the same man who's been in prison for 30 years, since he was 18 years old, has had 2 strokes, has had a heart attack, is on diabetes medication, has COPD. You know who's paying for all of that? We are, right? So who's punishing who? Who's being punished by him staying in prison? Who's being punished? I mean, I think those are the kinds of conversations, and as a policy person, those are the things that I'm thinking about. Those are the stories that we need to be collecting, and that we're collecting right now, that as we move out of this sort of emergency situation and back into business as usual, we don't allow them to take us back to business as usual. We use some of the lessons we learned to advance the policy positions that we've been advocating for. All right, I'm done, y'all, for real.
Thank you
Thank
so
you for
much,
that.
Dawn.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, I'll add in some of my knowledge around what happens when prison comes into a community. Well, first of all, they usually place these institutions in rural communities with small populations. So they usually end up being the largest employer in the area and have the best benefits and the highest wages to make it to where their populations want to keep these things up and running. Secondly, the population of the prison is then added to that community's population to where they receive a larger budget as far as the county budget goes. And that's probably 2 of the most massive changes on the political end of, you know, what happens when a prison comes into a community. Then you have the culture that develops around it, you know, where, because they've been placed in rural communities, these individuals' culture are usually different than the culture of the individuals that are inside of the prisons themselves. Whereas a lot of the individuals that end up in prison are from, you know, cities with larger populations of minorities, whereas rural communities usually have larger populations of white people. So so there's a disconnect between culture where you have two different cultures, and you have a population with one version or one view on life, and they are dominant within this system. So they already come in with a mindset that you're different than me, you're less than me, you're trash. Like, they're already not really looking at you as humans. They can't really relate to you because your culture is different. So that creates all types of issues, and that don't go for everybody. You know, there's all types of exceptions to that rule. This has just been my general experience. You know, the individuals that work there usually they have a completely different culture. Now, Polk is different. You know, it was plenty of officers that were gang members. Honestly, that's Raleigh Durham again. Look, Phil, that's Raleigh Durham again, where you have a larger population of minorities, and most of the guards that work there are from these populations. But there's usually a large disconnect between the individual that is incarcerated and the individual that has authority over the justice-involved individual. And then, you know, they are dependent on these jobs, so that creates a certain type of culture to where a lot of things get looked over, because these officers develop a camaraderie or a brotherhood just like the police do out here. And they look down upon, like, if an officer see another officer beating another inmate, you know, they all supposed to corroborate the story and disguise it. Now, I mean, the sergeant, the superintendent may fire you if it is realized that you go against this culture that is within this system, which is why a lot of things happen in there that nobody would never find out about. You know, when it comes into the community, I feel like it creates further separation, because then you have these guards that go out back into this community and communicate to their relatives and friends that, you know, these people in here are animals. You know, they doing this, they doing that. They're not going out there telling them what all they're doing. You know, they're not telling the whole story. They're telling a one-sided story. But that's just my version of what happens when a prison comes into a community. You know, it's usually placed, most of the prison camps I've been at are placed by a sewage plant or a chicken farm or some type of air pollution. There's usually going to be some type of air pollution around. There's going to be noise pollution, most likely. And I don't know, you're just out in the middle of nowhere almost. You know, of course, that, like I said, there's some exceptions to the rule, but they isolate you from what you know as society, unless you're from that rural area. You know, individuals in rural areas do get locked up, but then again, like I said, they have lower populations, and most of the individuals come from cities.
I have a follow-up question from what you were saying, Rob. So with the additional funding that they get, does that go towards helping the surrounding community, or how do they use that money?
However, the city officials deem to use that money. Of course, there's rules and guidelines. I don't know the exact rules and guidelines, but just as how here in Buncombe County, our city council or you know, the county manager and the city manager, they basically adopt a certain budget for the year, where, you know, funds go to this, funds go to infrastructure, funds go to that. It's the same thing. Now that their population has been boosted, they're able to receive more funding. So the prison system, you know, it helps them by providing the city with more funds. So they don't want it to go anywhere. You know, that's not something that they necessarily want to happen, because and they make money in other ways from the individuals incarcerated, like a lot of other ways. This is just one of the, you know, direct ways, I guess, you know, that they get literal money for adding on to their population, because it boosts their population total.
So as somebody who when I worked for Prisoners Legal Services, I represented incarcerated people all over the state, which necessarily meant that I traveled to prisons all over the state. And what I can tell you is that the vast majority of prisons in North Carolina are situated in incredibly rural areas. And so when we ask, how do communities benefit, especially rural communities, benefit from having prisons located in their counties? There are counties, lots of them, in North Carolina, where the entire economy of a place is built around the prison.
Yep.
If they lose that prison, they lose their entire economy. That doesn't mean, and when I say that, and when we talk about how prisons create these economies, we have to think very, very broadly, because we're not just talking about the people that work inside the prisons, right? Because there are people who work in the prisons. There are guards, there are cooks, there are people that work in the prisons. But also, we have to think about how the people that work in the prisons support local economies, right? Their income supports local economies. Like, there is a diner that all of these people go to for lunch. If those prisons are shut down, that diner shuts down. There are places outside that contract laundry, for example, or creating uniforms, or plates and dishes, all of the things that that are needed to run an institution that size, the community collaterally benefits from economically, right? So if your prison shuts down, for example, then, and let's say in a county like Pasquotank keeps coming to mind, but someplace where if the county where Pasquotank prison is located shuts down, right? There are thousands of people who lose their job just because the prison is closed, but then the collateral loss of income that is felt throughout the entire community because those people are no longer working is enough to shut down the whole community. I'm telling you, you cannot imagine. There are times I have driven to places. I'm gonna tell you, first of all, my favorite prison visit story was one time and I'm a city girl. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Okay. So I'm driving and there's like corn. There's corn everywhere. There's corn all over North Carolina. You may not know it if you don't travel, but it's corn everywhere. Corn and tobacco. Right? So I'm driving and I see this very large, what I think at the time is a dog. And it's running very, very fast. And I thought to myself, damn, that's a big dog. And as I got closer, and it's running towards the street. And as I got closer, I was like, oh, that's not a dog, it's a bear, a big old black bear, less than 2 miles away from the prison that I'm going to, right? Well, I'm getting ready to park my car and get out. When I tell you these prisons are in the middle of nowhere, I mean, they are in the middle of nowhere. There is not, like, there are counties, there are times when I would have to go to prisons where I would have to be 50 miles out and be like, I need to stop and get gas right now. Because if I don't get gas right now, I might not see another gas station for 30 miles, right? It is imperative that we understand the connection between rural communities, economic security, and the carceral system. And that when we're talking about dismantling the carceral system, that we understand that that means it has got to be replaced with something. Because if not, there are huge parts of North Carolina that will become economically destitute. We have got to, so what we cannot afford to do is say abolish, 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 but then have no alternative economic plans for these communities that will be deeply impacted by the economic loss, right? So and I think that's easy, right? Because again, if we divest from the carceral system but invest in people, that same money stays there. We just invested in different places. It just looks like different services that are being offered. It looks like community centers for kids to take arts and crafts. It looks like, if reinvested in our community colleges and making sure that people have scholarships and access to go to further their education or to pick up those vocational, those blue collar skills that we were talking about, HVC, I said it wrong, whatever, you know what I mean. But to pick up those, like there, we can keep that money there. And it's really easy to do if we just reinvest it into programs and things that build people and not prisons. But it's scary. And for those small rural communities, they want to hold on to what they know. We just have to help them reimagine a different economy. But it is not hard. It wouldn't be hard to do at all. It's just really different than what they've been doing for a very, very long time.
I want to lift up this piece around, Dawn, when you were talking about people getting released from jail. I want to lift up this piece that sometimes I don't think people know about minimum security, like prisons. So my brother, the last 2 years, my brother was in jail. He was in Buncombe County, our prison, the Buncombe County Correctional Center, you know, and so it was interesting because when I think of people who I'm like, oh, like these, we should just literally open the jail. I think of him and so many people who were literally going to a factory Monday through Friday for 12 hours. And then on Friday evening, their families got to go to the prison, pick them up, and then take them back on Sunday night. I don't think people realize that there are people in prison who get to go spend the weekend with their families. And so when we talk about risk, I'm like, if they really were a risk, why would they be going to spend the weekends with their families? No parole officer, no police officers came to our house to check on my brother. He was just there, right? And so I think about how when we talk about how this system doesn't make sense, it's because, like, it literally doesn't make sense that we're like, you're going to get out soon, so we'll let you go spend the weekends with your family, but we're not going to actually release you. And so I don't know if a lot of people realize that there are people in prison who get to go home on the weekends and then on Sunday nights they go back to prison. And so this notion that people just have I think we have been taught, and the media and movies play a big role in that, of like what prisons are actually like. There's like a reality show now, like reality shows for every type of prison, right? And so, yeah, I don't know, that story just like sits with me of like Buncombe County, like prison. I'm like, everyone goes home. That's a minimum security. Like, send people home to their families. Like, it doesn't make sense. So just sharing that.
Thank you, Nicole. I did not know that piece. And yeah, the more and more, like, you know, as Nicole started this off, we were not meant to be in cages, sure. So we are at time, but I do want to just let the panelists have an opportunity, if there's any last word you want to say to lift up any piece from today that you really want to leave us with. And I just want to thank you all, each of you, so much for being here, panelists and participants.
I just want to thank you for having me. I appreciate it. This has been really, you know, in the time of COVID, when we don't get to see folks and we spend a lot of time on phone calls and stuff, it's fun. This is good. It's good for the spirit to have these kinds of conversations. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Dawn.
Nicole finna sing, y'all.
I will not be singing this evening, Mr. Cooper. But I'm thankful for this space. I'm also thankful that more spaces that aren't necessarily like prison justice spaces are like expanding the conversation to include this, because it's impacting all of us, even if we don't see it. So thank y'all for just having this space.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the space and the opportunity. And I seen somebody put in the chat about the bears. Bears be going in my trash on the regular, Don.
Don's not about that. And Rob, you too, I want to lift up if Rob, you have any last words to share with us.
Yeah, I would just like to thank everybody for being a part of this. You know, Nicole, Phillip, Dunn, I mean, y'all really came through. Y'all made this amazing. You know, all of y'all's perspectives was definitely needed in this. We had some deep conversations and were able to pull out some important facts and information. You know,